The first thing Elias Brennan noticed wasn't her resume. It was the wind-tossed hair and the calm determination in her eyes as she stepped into his office. A woman in a second-hand blouse, with a mind sharp enough to make his polished world pause for a beat. "You biked here?" he asked, more curious than surprised. Sienna Clark stood straight, her breath steady despite the rush of the morning behind her. "If I'm going to talk about sustainable living, I have to live it. Besides, cycling clears the noise, helps you remember why you're doing what you're doing." Elias, founder of Solterra Innovations and a man used to tailored suits and private elevators, leaned back in his chair. The candidates who usually sat across from him arrived wrapped in luxury, resumes gleaming with Ivy League polish. She was different. She hadn't come to impress with things that could be bought. "Most people try to look successful," he murmured. She offered a quiet smile. "Success isn't always loud." 6 hours earlier, in a cramped apartment on the edge of the city, Sienna had woken to darkness again. The silence wasn't peaceful, but heavy. Her phone's flashlight revealed the cause. Another overdue notice. Third time this year. From the hallway, Lila's sleepy voice broke through. "No power?" "Not until Friday," Sienna replied, already lighting a candle. "Today's the Solterra interview." Lila rubbed her eyes. "You really think they'll go for someone without the right last name or diploma?" Sienna laid her clothes across the bed, smoothing the creases with care. Her one professional outfit, white blouse, navy skirt, clean, simple, and perfect in its own way. "They might go for someone who actually has ideas." Lila hesitated. "At least let me call a ride. You can't show up looking like you fought the wind." "We can't afford that," Sienna said gently. "Besides, I'll ride through Maplewood Park. It's quiet there. Gives me space to breathe." Across town, the day had started differently for Elias. The blinds of his high-rise apartment lifted themselves, letting in golden light over glass and chrome. His espresso brewed itself, his schedule read aloud by a calm, robotic voice. "You have 6 interviews today for the sustainability director position," said Naomi, his assistant, over the speaker. He barely nodded, scanning faces and names on his tablet. Most of them were what you'd expect, Harvard, Yale buzzwords and boardrooms. He sipped his coffee and sighed. "Any of them different?" he asked. Naomi's voice paused, then replied, "There's one. Sienna Clark, State University. No big company names, but her research, bold, original. Her references say she's a bit unconventional." Elias set the tablet down. Unconventional. He looked toward the door again, where Sienna sat now, eyes calm but full of fire. Maybe that was exactly what the future needed. By the time the clock neared 9, Sienna Clark had secured her bicycle to a street sign just outside the luminous facade of Solterra Innovations. The building rose like a sculpture of glass and ambition, its presence both inviting and intimidating. She slipped quietly into the restroom, splashing cold water onto her face and smoothing her hair. The ride had given her cheeks a soft flush, not polished, not glamorous, but there was honesty in her reflection. She looked like someone who had arrived the hard way. When the elevator doors slid open on the top floor, a woman in a sleek charcoal suit awaited her behind a marble desk. "Sienna Clark?" The woman's tone was polite but measured. "You're early." Sienna offered a gentle smile. "The roads were clearer than I expected." The woman, Naomi, tilted her head, eyebrows lifting ever so slightly. "Did you bike here?" 5 miles, Sienna replied, mostly flat terrain. Inside the office, the city stretched out beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, a reminder of both progress and disparity. Sitting across from Elias Brennan, a man whose suit likely cost more than Sienna's rent, she met his gaze without flinching. "I've reviewed your proposals," Elias said, flipping through the pages of her portfolio. "Impressive work. But tell me, if money weren't a limitation, what would you build?" Sienna leaned forward, her voice steady. "That's just it. Money is always the limitation, especially for the people who need sustainable solutions the most." She paused, then continued, more passionately. "I would design low-cost solar systems for affordable housing, water purification systems that don't require massive infrastructure, tools that communities can actually use, not just admire in articles." Elias set the folder down, his expression thoughtful. "Most candidates pitch me innovations for people already living comfortably," he said. "High-end ecotech for those who can afford luxury sustainability." "With respect," Sienna replied, Those people aren't the ones contributing to the worst environmental damage. It's the communities without options, still burning, still dumping, because no one ever gave them an alternative. Elias didn't interrupt. He just listened, for longer than he usually allowed himself to. By the time the scheduled interview ended, something in the room had shifted. Still, he stood, formal again. "Thank you, Miss Clark. We have several more candidates to see, but we'll be in touch by week's end." Sienna rose, shook his hand firmly, and walked out with quiet dignity. She hadn't tried to impress, she'd told the truth. A moment later, Naomi returned with another folder in hand. Elias glanced at it, then paused, distracted. "The woman who biked here," he said slowly. "Her research, something about it felt familiar. Could be that anonymous study from State University, the one on low-cost filtration methods? The one you've referenced in 3 board meetings this quarter?" Naomi's eyes widened a few moments later. She had checked. Fast. "It's her," she said, breathless. "Sienna Clark wrote that paper." Elias stood abruptly. "Is she still in the building?" "She just reached the lobby." "Stop her. Tell her I need to speak with her. Now." Minutes later, Sienna reappeared in his office. Confusion etched across her face. Before she could speak, Elias did. "I'd like to offer you the position." She blinked. "But the other candidates?" He shook his head. "None of them wrote the paper that's been shaping our entire water strategy for 6 months." She stood still, stunned into silence. "That paper wasn't published under my name," she finally managed, the composure in her voice giving way to something raw, honest. "I know," Elias said, arms crossed. "The university published it anonymously. At your request, right? Why?" "I wanted the work to be judged for what it was, not dismissed because it came from a student with no connections and no title." A smile pulled at the corner of Elias's mouth. "Well, it got my attention. We've been applying your filtration design in several of our projects in Southeast Asia." "You have?" she whispered. And for the first time that day, her carefully guarded professionalism began to soften, replaced by a flicker of something more powerful. Hope. A flicker of something like disbelief crossed Sienna's face, just for a moment. Then she steadied herself again. "That's why I want you on my team," Elias said, his voice firm with conviction. "The role starts at $120,000 plus full benefits." Her eyes widened slightly, but her expression remained composed. "That's generous," she said. But Elias caught the pause between her words. "You're hesitating." Sienna met his gaze, not with doubt, but with clarity. "I'm more interested in what I'd be doing than what I'd be earning." He motioned for her to sit once more, leaning forward. "You'd be leading our sustainability strategy," he said. "You'd report directly to me." She nodded slowly, then asked, "Would that include community implementation? Real-world projects beyond corporate partnerships?" "That's not our current direction," Elias admitted. Sienna didn't miss a beat. "Then I'd like to propose an addition to the role," she said. "A community outreach initiative, something that runs in parallel with the corporate work, where we test real applications of our technology in under-resourced neighborhoods, places that otherwise wouldn't have access." Elias raised an eyebrow, studying her again. Most candidates asked for corner offices or signing bonuses. She was asking to build something meaningful. "That would require shifting resources." "Call it an investment in applied research," Sienna replied. "Because what works in those environments, low-cost, adaptable, efficient, can scale anywhere. But the reverse, it rarely works." Elias walked to the tall windows, staring out at the city skyline. From up here, everything looked uniform, equal. But they both knew that wasn't the truth. 3-month pilot, he said after a pause. "If it shows potential, we'll expand it." Sienna stood, her voice unwavering. "Then I accept." He turned and reached out his hand. "Elias," he said with a smile, "welcome to Solterra." 2 weeks later, Sienna sat in her new office, a small, sunlit space lined with notes, reference books, and open design sketches. Unlike the more curated workspaces around her, hers felt raw, purposeful. A single potted fern sat near the window, next to a framed photo of her mother. A knock at the door broke her focus. Naomi stood there, tablet in hand. "Mr. Brennan wants you in the Bennett meeting. 5 minutes." Sienna grabbed her own tablet. "Remind me, who's Bennett?" "Richard Bennett," Naomi said. "Board member, close friend of Elias's father, and the one most likely to question why you're here." Sienna raised an eyebrow. He believes in hierarchy, pedigree, traditional systems, Naomi continued, and he's not exactly thrilled about your unconventional background. Got it, Sienna replied, calm as ever, and followed her down the hall. The conference room was all glass, steel, and legacy. Elias was already there, seated next to a silver-haired man with a suit tailored down to the thread. 2 other board members sat nearby, all posture and scrutiny. Ah, there she is, Elias stood. Gentlemen, this is Sienna Clark, our new Director of Sustainability. Richard Bennett gave her a glance that felt like a quick scan through an old lens. I hear you arrived at your interview on a bicycle, he said dryly. I did, Sienna replied, taking a seat across from him. How quaint, Bennett muttered. I hope you understand Solterra works with multinational corporations and government contracts. In our world, appearances matter. Sienna didn't flinch. So does authenticity, she said evenly. Our clients don't hire us for our transportation choices. They hire us to solve environmental challenges no one else can. Elias cleared his throat. Sienna's research on low-cost water purification is already being used in 3 countries. Bennett folded his hands. Yes, I've read the paper. Thought-provoking theory. But corporate sustainability is more than ideals. It's numbers, margins, and keeping shareholders happy. Sienna looked straight at him. Then it's time we show them that sustainability can be profitable, and that impact and revenue don't have to be enemies. With all due respect, Mr. Bennett, Sienna said, leaning forward slightly, her tone unwavering. Profit and sustainability aren't enemies. In fact, companies that invest in real environmental practices see up to 16% better returns over time, compared to those just pretending. Bennett's eyebrows lifted, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Before the tension could settle further, Elias interjected, smooth as ever. I believe we're here to discuss the Keller proposal. The conversation shifted, but Sienna's presence lingered in the room like a quiet current. As the discussion deepened, she dissected the environmental implications of the Keller deal with precision, highlighting blind spots, suggesting alternatives. Her proposed revisions not only enhanced the sustainability metrics, but also revealed long-term cost savings the board hadn't considered. Even Bennett, ever the skeptic, gave a reluctant nod. Later that afternoon, Elias appeared at her doorway, leaning casually against the frame. Bennett isn't easily impressed, he said. But today, you held your ground. Sienna didn't glance up. Her eyes were on the documents before her, pen in hand. I've spent most of my life being underestimated, she said simply. You learn how to carry your voice when no one expects to hear it. Elias smiled at that. We have dinner with some investors tomorrow. I'd like you to come. I'll be there, Sienna replied, still writing. Just text me the address. I can send a car. Now she looked up. Not necessary. I'll make my own way. On your bike? He asked, half amused. Is that a problem? Elias paused, eyes thoughtful. You know, when I started Solterra, I drove a 15-year-old car that stalled at every red light. My father said I'd never get investors looking like I needed their money. He straightened, the hint of a memory still playing in his voice. But the ones who mattered, they didn't care about the car. They cared about the idea. He turned to leave. Dinner's at 7. Get there however you want. The next evening, Sienna cycled through the evening air toward Dukas, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of the city. After locking her bike a discreet distance from the valet station, she smoothed her simple black dress and stepped inside. The maitre d' raised an eyebrow until she mentioned Elias Brennan's name. Then everything shifted. She was led to a private dining room, where Elias stood with 4 others, 3 men, 1 woman, all dressed in quiet elegance. Elias rose as she entered. Everyone, this is Sienna Clark, the driving force behind our community sustainability initiative. As greetings were exchanged, Sienna felt the weight of subtle glances, curiosity, doubt, perhaps even intrigue. Over dinner, the questions came. Elias mentioned you biked to your interview, one investor said. Do you still do that? I do, Sienna replied, including tonight. In that dress? The woman investor asked, clearly impressed. Sienna grinned. With a few clever clips, it's only 5 miles. Great for the environment, great for clearing your head, and I save a couple thousand a year on parking. Not to mention gym fees, the woman laughed. But the conversation shifted quickly from icebreakers to real questions. Sienna spoke with quiet conviction about making green technology accessible, scalable, human, and to her surprise, they listened. The market potential is massive, the woman investor noted. Affordable means scalable. Scalability means impact. When the evening ended, the rain had begun to fall. Not softly, but in thick, impatient drops. Elias looked at her bike, then back at her. "Let me drive you home," he offered. Sienna smiled. "I'm waterproof." Just then, a low crack of thunder rolled across the sky, and the drizzle turned into a downpour. She laughed softly. "Okay, maybe not tonight." They rode through the city in silence for a while. His electric car gliding through streets washed in reflections. Elias glanced at her. "My father never believed environmental ideals belonged in the boardroom." "My father never believed in clean tech," Elias said, his voice suddenly quieter than before. "He wanted me in oil. When I launched Solterra, he called it a hobby, something I'd outgrow." Sienna turned her head, watching him in the dim glow of the dashboard. What changed his mind? Elias's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "Nothing," he said. "He passed away before we broke even. Sometimes I wonder if he'd be proud, or if he'd still think I was chasing dreams that didn't pay." Sienna's voice was soft. "Looking at what you've built, he would have had no choice but to admit he was wrong." The car slowed in front of her apartment building. It was modest, worn around the edges, with ivy clinging to cracked bricks and a rusted metal gate standing guard at the entrance. "Thanks for tonight," Elias said. "The investors were impressed," she replied. "With Solterra's potential?" he asked. Sienna glanced at him. "With your vision for it," he said. "Good night, Sienna." She stepped out into the drizzle and watched the taillights of his car fade into the wet night. For the first time, the layers of Elias Brennan, the sharp-suited executive, seemed to slip, revealing something more fragile underneath. "You live here?" The surprise in Elias's voice wasn't meant to insult, but it lingered in the air anyway. Sienna raised an eyebrow, hearing the unintended judgment. "Not everyone has a penthouse view," she replied, her tone edged with pride. "It's affordable, 3 bus lines nearby, and there's a secure spot for my bike in the basement." Elias shifted awkwardly in his seat. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," she said, cutting him off gently. Her hand reached for the door handle. "Wait," he said. "Thank you for coming tonight. Really. The investors responded to you in a way I haven't seen before. They saw something real." Her shoulders relaxed just a bit. "Good night, Elias." 2 weeks later, Sienna had settled into her role at Solterra with quiet determination. Her office was no longer just a space. It was a center of energy. Charts lined the walls, sticky notes cluttered the edges of whiteboards, and a small team was forming around her pilot outreach program. But the contrast between her days and nights grew sharper. At work, she moved through glass-walled conference rooms and sipped coffee from machines that offered more options than she could count. Her colleagues spoke of beachfront timeshares and elite prep schools. At home, she and Lila tracked coupons, split grocery costs, and took turns coaxing the ancient water heater into working. One evening, over a plastic container of instant noodles, Lila raised a brow. "Let me get this straight. You spent the day watching a boardroom approve a 6-figure budget for your community program, and now you're here eating discount stir-fry with me?" Sienna twirled the noodles with her fork and smiled. "I'm saving for Mom's medical bills, and I like our noodle nights." "I bet your millionaire boss dines at places with 10 forks on the table." Sienna thought about Elias. The way he'd opened up in the car, the weight in his voice when he spoke of his father. She wasn't sure what kind of meals he had, but she was beginning to understand that wealth didn't always mean comfort. The next morning, Sienna arrived at Solterra to find Naomi waiting outside her office, her expression unusually tense. "Emergency meeting." 10 minutes, she said. "Phoenix Project investors are here, early. I wasn't scheduled to present today." "Neither was Elias," Naomi said, voice low. "Richard Bennett arranged it. He's hoping to catch both of you off guard." Sienna's breath slowed, centering herself as she gathered her notes. In the conference room, Richard sat with 3 investors, relaxed and smug. Elias stood at the head of the table, outwardly calm, but his clenched jaw betrayed his unease. "Miss Clark," Richard began smoothly, "we were just discussing the financial viability of your community outreach initiative." "The project," Richard Bennett said flatly, "might be better served as a charitable foundation. separate from Solterra's core operations. One of the investors, a sharply observant woman named Diana Winters, turned her gaze to Sienna. He suggests your program would function more effectively as a form of philanthropy. Sienna took her seat with quiet composure. With respect, she said, that view frames sustainability for low-income communities as a handout. What we're building isn't charity, it's innovation. Applied, adaptive, and long overdue. Research that may never bring in a return, Richard countered. Sienna turned toward Elias, who gave a subtle nod. Then she tapped her tablet, and the screen behind her flickered to life. She gestured toward the display. These are the green solutions currently available to the average consumer, she said. They're expensive, complex, most require expert installation. She advanced to the next slide. These are our community pilot prototypes, modular, simple, designed to be installed by the users themselves, and they cost 40% less to produce. Diana leaned forward, intrigued. Lower costs also mean thinner margins. Initially, yes, Sienna agreed, but accessibility unlocks scale. Right now, our premium solutions reach maybe 15% of the market. These could reach 60%, maybe more. Over the next 20 minutes, she guided them through cost curves, impact metrics, and market forecasts. When she finished, the room held a thoughtful silence. Elias was the first to speak. This approach honors our mission and broadens our reach. I stand behind it. Diana gave a small nod. I'd like to see the sites, not just the slides, real implementation. Absolutely, Sienna replied. We've selected 3 neighborhoods for the initial rollout. Richard's lips thinned. Site visits aren't typical procedure for investors. Perhaps they should be, Diana said coolly. After the meeting, Elias turned to her. That was impressive. Bennett didn't look too convinced. He's holding on to an old model, Elias replied. But he has influence. These site visits need to be flawless. They will be, Sienna said with quiet certainty. People in these neighborhoods, my people, don't have the luxury of waste. They've always had to innovate with what little they had. Elias studied her. You're speaking from experience. Sienna hesitated, then nodded. I grew up in a place like this. My mom worked 2 jobs. We didn't have the money for fancy systems. We made things last. A week later, Sienna stood waiting outside Solterra's headquarters. A sleek black company car pulled up with Elias and Diana inside. Sienna opened the driver's side door. I'll drive, she said. They both looked surprised. I know these streets better than any GPS. As the city skyline faded in the rearview mirror, the scenery began to shift. Towering buildings gave way to modest homes with patchy gardens and children chasing soccer balls on cracked pavement. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. This is actually where I grew up, Sienna said as they slowed to a stop. My mother still lives just a few blocks from here. Diana glanced around. How long did you live here? Until college, Sienna replied. I got out on a state scholarship, but a lot of my friends, they stayed. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. There's strength in this community. You'll feel it. Their first stop was the local community center, now fitted with a water collection and filtration prototype built under the pilot program. Marcus Williams, the center's director, met them at the entrance with a warm handshake. Sienna's system cut our water bill by 40%, he said, leading them inside. The setup was simple, intuitive, and already changing lives. We're using the savings to expand the after-school program for the kids. Diana's expression softened as she looked at the system. Less like a venture capitalist and more like a human being. Something unspoken passed between her and Sienna in that moment. A recognition, a shift, and perhaps the beginning of belief. Diana asked sharp, pointed questions at every stop, while Elias observed quietly, often choosing to listen more than speak. Sienna noticed how he moved through the community, not as an executive evaluating assets, but as someone beginning to see a different world with new eyes. At a quiet street lined with modest homes, they visited one of the sites where Solterra's simplified solar panel system had been installed. My nephew and I put these up over the weekend, said Mrs. Garcia, a retired school teacher, pride dancing in her eyes. For the first time in years, my electric bill doesn't make me anxious. As they continued the tour, Sienna kept glancing at Elias. He was taking everything in: the faded paint, the laughter of kids playing nearby, the practical ingenuity of neighbors who had learned to make do with so little and sometimes do even more. Back in the car, Diana turned to Sienna. "I've seen all I need," she said. "I'll recommend full funding for the expansion phase." Sienna couldn't contain her smile. "Thank you," she said softly. They dropped Diana at her hotel, and for a while, Elias and Sienna remained in the car. The hum of the engine filled the silence. "Your community is remarkable," Elias said at last. "They've managed so much with so little." "That's exactly why this work matters," Sienna replied. "Innovation doesn't just come from labs or boardrooms. Sometimes it grows from necessity, from resilience." He was quiet for a moment longer. "Would you show me where you grew up?" The question caught her off guard. "Are you serious?" "I'd like to understand." They drove down streets she hadn't traveled in years. Finally, Sienna pulled up in front of a small, neatly kept house with flower boxes on the windows and a weathered welcome mat. "That's my mom's place," she said, her voice touched with something between nostalgia and pride. "She's probably working right now, hospital receptionist." Elias studied the house. "It looks like a home," he said, "lived in, loved." "It is," Sienna replied, then hesitated. "What about you? Where did you grow up?" "Private estates," he said, "boarding schools, homes built to impress, not to belong." There was a pause, a subtle weight in his voice. "My father thought image was everything." Sienna looked at him, and for the first time saw not just the polished exterior of a powerful man, but someone who also knew what it meant to live behind masks and expectations. Different worlds, but perhaps not so far apart after all. "This is it?" Elias asked as they stepped into a small garden tucked between two aging apartment buildings. The morning sun filtered through tree branches overhead, casting golden light on rows of tomatoes, herbs, and leafy greens. The greenhouse made from salvaged windows sat proudly at one end. "This is it," Sienna confirmed, waving at a few gardeners already at work. "We're planning to install the water reclamation system here. It'll serve the garden and both apartment buildings." Elias crouched near the edge of a planting bed, running his fingers through the soil. "Good drainage, smart location." An older man in worn jeans approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "You must be Mr. Brennan," he said with a grin. "Sienna talks about your company like it's about to save the world." "This is David Chen," Sienna said warmly. "He coordinates the garden, and he's been helping us identify where water gets lost in the current setup." "Call me David," the man said, shaking Elias's hand firmly. "So your fancy gardens growing up, any of them feed people?" "Strictly ornamental," Elias admitted. David beamed. "Well, this one's community-fed and community-feeding. We supply produce to over 30 families and the kitchen down the block." For the next hour, Elias walked the space with Sienna and David, asking quiet, thoughtful questions about runoff, usage patterns, collection methods. He wasn't just listening, he was learning. At one point, Elias paused, pointing toward the rooftops. "If we extend the rainwater collection to those surfaces, we could double the system's efficiency, with minimal redesign." Sienna looked at him, a new light in her eyes. He wasn't just supporting her vision anymore. He was beginning to share it. "With just a few extra materials," Elias said, still crouched by the garden beds, "we could double the system's capacity." Sienna blinked, caught off guard. "That's actually a really good idea." He gave her a half smile. "Occasionally, I have those." After the site visit, they walked to a small cafe a few blocks away. The place had mismatched chairs, hand-painted mugs, and the unmistakable aroma of strong coffee brewing somewhere behind the counter. "I used to study here in college," Sienna said, waving to the woman behind the register. "Best coffee in the neighborhood. They never minded if I sat here for hours with one cup and a stack of notes." Elias looked around, quietly absorbing the atmosphere, the buzzing conversation, the flyers pinned to a cluttered bulletin board, the way everyone seemed to know each other's names. "It's different from the places near Solterra." "Better or worse?" Sienna asked, tilting her head. "Just different," Elias replied. "More human, more connected." Their coffees arrived, carried by a teenager who grinned and gave Sienna a high five. "Mom says your fancy new job hasn't stopped you from hanging out with us regular folks." "Tell your mom nothing on earth could keep me from her cinnamon rolls," Sienna replied with a laugh. As the teen disappeared into the kitchen, Elias leaned in. "You're really part of this place." "I always will be," she said, stirring her coffee gently. "These people helped raise me, cheered when I graduated, Bought my mom groceries when she was too sick to work. You don't forget that kind of love, no matter what zip code you live in. Elias looked down at his cup. I've lived in the same building for 3 years. I couldn't name a single neighbor. Sienna's voice was quiet, but sure. That's the real difference between our lives. It's not the money. It's the connections. Back at Solterra, her program was gaining real traction. With Diana's official endorsement and Elias's growing passion for the work, the budget was expanded. Sienna built a team with care, not just based on credentials, but on heart. She brought in Michael Park, an engineering savant who spoke in equations more than sentences, and Zoe Alvarez, a brilliant marketing specialist who turned down more glamorous roles to be part of something that mattered. Why leave digital strategy for community work? Sienna asked her during the interview. My parents live in one of the neighborhoods you're working with, Zoe said. I'd rather help them than design ads for people who already have everything. 3 weeks into the rollout, Sienna was gathering her things after a long meeting when Richard Bennett approached. Quite the little empire you're building, he said, voice smooth, but his eyes like ice. Solterra's board approved the budget based on projected outcomes, Sienna answered calmly. The data backs our model. Data can be shaped, Bennett said, stepping closer. James has always had a soft spot for idealists. His father used to worry it'd cloud his judgment. Before Sienna could respond, Naomi appeared at her side. Emma, Elias needs you in his office. She found him standing at his desk, frowning down at a collection of potted plants. You needed me? He looked up, a little sheepish. It's my mother's birthday tomorrow. I usually send flowers, but after seeing that garden, I thought maybe something living would be more meaningful. Sienna smiled. And you need a plant consultant? He gestured at the tiny jungle in front of him. They all look the same to me. Sienna knelt beside the plants, her eyes scanning them gently. What's she like? Elegant, traditional, secretly obsessed with birdwatching, though she'd never admit it. Sienna picked up a delicate white flowering plant with soft green leaves. This one, she said. It's quiet, but it lasts, like her. Jasmine, Sienna said, lifting the small plant gently. Classic, elegant. Its scent draws butterflies if she places it near a window. Elias looked visibly relieved. Perfect, thank you. Just then a notification flashed across his screen. His posture stiffened. The board meeting's been moved up to tomorrow morning. Sienna frowned. We weren't scheduled to present for another week. Bennett, Elias muttered with a tired sigh, will need to finalize all quarterly reports tonight. By evening, the building had mostly emptied. Sienna returned to Elias's office with 2 cups of strong coffee and found him surrounded by a forest of open spreadsheets, numbers dancing across multiple monitors. She handed him the cup and leaned over one of the screens. The community program is already showing early returns, she pointed out. Energy savings in pilot locations are well above projections. That's our bright spot, Elias agreed, rubbing his eyes. International division is lagging. Costs up, impact down. Sienna pulled over a chair and scanned the figures. They're applying the same model everywhere, without accounting for cultural or regional needs. Elias looked at her, impressed. You've been reviewing their reports? I try to understand the whole company, she said, not just the part with my name on it. They worked late into the night, ordering takeout and covering his conference table with pages and highlighters. When the final report was saved and sent, Sienna stood to leave. How are you getting home? Elias asked, glancing at the clock for the first time. It was nearly midnight. Rideshare, she replied with a yawn. Too late to cycle. I'll drive you. In the quiet of the car, city lights flickered past, and the hush of night softened everything. It was a silence that held meaning, not awkward but open. Thanks for staying late, Elias said as they neared her apartment. The report's stronger with your insight. That's what teammates do, she answered. He pulled up outside her building, pausing before she stepped out. About Bennett, he said. Just be careful. He was my father's closest advisor. He still believes he's protecting the company from my recklessness. Like hiring me? Sienna asked, a small smile tugging at her lips. Like believing that innovation shouldn't belong only to the wealthy few, Elias said. That access matters. Sienna studied him in the dim glow of the street lamp. And you believe that? I'm learning, Elias replied. Good night, Elias. The next morning, Sienna woke to a message from him. Board unanimously approved next phase funding. Bennett outvoted. She stared at the screen, stunned, a surge of hope rising in her chest. For the first time, she felt the impossible might be shifting. Her two worlds, one of purpose, one of power, might not be as incompatible as she had feared. And Elias Brennan might just be building the bridge himself. But hope has a way of being tested. They're cutting our funding, Sienna said aloud, staring at the new budget proposal on her tablet. The numbers didn't lie. 60% of the community outreach program's resources, gone. Zoe leaned over her shoulder, disbelief in her voice. That has to be a mistake. We've exceeded every target. Sienna scrolled down, scanning for justification. There's a note here. Consolidation of resources toward core business activities. Bennett's phrasing, Michael muttered from across the room. He's been whispering in board members' ears for weeks. Sienna set the tablet down slowly, her expression hardening. I need to talk to Elias. She made her way toward his office. The door, usually open, was shut. She could hear voices inside. Raised, strained. Everything all right? She asked Naomi, who stood nearby. The budget meeting ran long, Naomi said, carefully neutral. And not in a good way. Just then, the door opened. Richard Bennett stepped out, smoothing his suit and wearing the expression of a man who had just won something. Bennett offered Sienna a curt nod before disappearing down the hallway toward the elevators. Moments later, Elias appeared in the doorway of his office, tension carved into every line of his face. Sienna, he said. Come in. Once the door clicked shut behind her, he dropped into his chair like someone carrying more than just spreadsheets on his shoulders. You saw the proposal, he said quietly. What happened? Sienna asked, her voice sharp. Just last month the board was fully behind us. Market pressures, shifting priorities. Elias spoke like someone reciting from a script he didn't believe in. Bennett convinced them it's safer to focus on premium clients during economic uncertainty. That's code, Sienna said. Corporate speak for retreating, for giving up. She stepped closer, her voice rising. The community program isn't charity. It's where our innovation begins. It's the lab, the test field, the proof of purpose. You know that. I do, Elias said, his voice low. Do you? She snapped. Because the minute things get hard, it looks like you're pulling resources back to make safe bets for people who already have everything. Elias stood, frustration flashing in his eyes. That's not fair. I fought for this program. Not hard enough. Her words were ice. Apparently, you understand business, but you don't understand people. We're honoring our existing commitments, he replied, trying to steady the conversation. Just not expanding. Sienna began to pace in front of his desk, each step fueled by disbelief. So that's it? Was this all just good PR? Greenwashing dressed in sincerity? A shiny project to make Solterra look like it cares? That's beneath you, Elias said, his voice quieter now. And it's beneath me. You know I'm not that person. Sienna stopped pacing. Do I? She looked at him, really looked at him. Because right now, you sound exactly like the man I thought you were the day I biked into this building. Pain flickered in his expression, but pride kept him from stepping back. I have a responsibility to the entire company, Sienna, not just your passion project. The words were out before he could stop them. The regret came instantly, but it was too late. I have a team to inform, Sienna said, her voice calm and cutting. They need to know just how unimportant their work is to Solterra's future. Sienna, excuse me, she said, walking past him. The following week, the atmosphere between them was ice. No more coffee shared over spreadsheets, no more late-night brainstorming or quiet rides home. Conversations became emails. Warmth gave way to formality. Sienna buried herself in what remained of the outreach program, working long after the office emptied, salvaging what she could with what they had left. Her team followed her lead, determined not to let a budget define their worth. Meanwhile, Elias couldn't shake the unease growing in his chest, especially not when he saw how easily Bennett had filled the silence. During a private dinner with several key board members, Elias noticed Bennett glancing at his phone again and again. Something important, Richard? Elias asked casually. Just confirming a few details, Bennett replied smoothly. For our strategy pivot. Pivot? Sylvia Chan, a board member, looked up from her wine. What pivot? Bennett smiled. James and I have been exploring options for maximizing Solterra's patent value. Nothing final yet. Elias froze. He had agreed to no such thing. The next morning, Elias called Naomi into his office. "I need you to dig into Bennett's recent correspondence," discreetly. By late afternoon, she returned, closing the door behind her. Her expression told him everything before she said a word. "You need to see this." She placed a folder on his desk. Inside were emails, dozens of them, between Richard Bennett and senior executives at NextGen Resources, a conglomerate infamous for buying up green tech patents only to bury them in favor of their own outdated, polluting systems. Bennett wasn't consolidating. He was selling Solterra's future. "He's been negotiating to sell our core filtration patents," Elias said, disbelief threading through his voice. Olivia didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned to the final page of the report. "It gets worse. The deal includes personal provisions, board placement at NextGen, stock options. He's not just selling Solterra's future, he's securing his own." Elias stared at the pages, the betrayal hitting like a gut punch. "Richard," he whispered. "He was my father's friend. I trusted him." That afternoon, Elias called an emergency board meeting. As the directors arrived, Bennett entered with his usual air of calm authority. That confidence faltered when Elias began handing out folders, one to each board member. "What is the meaning of this?" Sylvia Chan demanded, scanning the pages. "A misunderstanding," Bennett began. "These emails show you negotiating the sale of Solterra's most valuable patents to NextGen," Elias cut in coldly, while at the same time pushing to dismantle the only program that would challenge their market dominance. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Questions, outrage, disbelief. Bennett floundered, claiming he was simply exploring options, but the documents told a different story, and everyone knew it. After nearly an hour of tense deliberation, the board voted. Richard Bennett was removed, pending full investigation. As the others filed out, Elias remained seated at the long table, hands resting on the pages that had revealed just how deeply he had been deceived by the man he once considered a mentor. That evening, Sienna was still in her office, working late, when Elias appeared in the doorway. His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" She set down her pen and nodded. He stepped inside and handed her the folder. "You should see this." As Sienna flipped through the documents, her face shifted, from curiosity to disbelief to quiet anger. "He was sabotaging us," she said at last, "while gutting the program, on purpose." Elias nodded. "The same program that posed a threat to NextGen's profit model. This wasn't caution, it was calculated." Sienna closed the folder slowly. "So what now?" "The boards voted him out," Elias said, "and I owe you an apology." He looked at her, the exhaustion in his eyes deeper than any spreadsheet could explain. "You were right to question me. I should have looked closer at his motives instead of defending him blindly." "And the cuts?" she asked. "Reversed. Fully. And the board approved a 15% increase for accelerated rollout." Sienna should have smiled, should have felt victorious, but she didn't, not fully. "This isn't just about numbers for you, is it?" Elias shook his head. "After my father passed, Richard wasn't just an advisor. He stepped in, guided me, and I believed he had Solterra's best interests at heart." He ran a hand through his hair, the vulnerability raw on his face. "Now I'm questioning everything. Who else I've trusted, what I might have missed." Without hesitation, Sienna reached across the desk, placing her hand gently over his. "You can still trust your instincts, Elias. You built this company with vision and heart. One betrayal doesn't erase that." Their eyes met. "I've missed working with you this past week," he said quietly. "I've missed it too," she replied. "Even when I was furious," he smiled faintly. "Partners again?" Sienna nodded. "Partners." Later that week, as rain poured down, Sienna stood at the corner near Solterra's headquarters, searching the bike rack in growing frustration. "I know it's here somewhere," she muttered, her hood dripping, jacket soaked through. A man passing by slowed. "Looking for a blue commuter bike?" he asked. "I think I just saw." "I saw someone cutting a lock about an hour ago," the man said. "I called the police, but—" Sienna's heart sank before he could finish. "Thanks for trying," she said, voice thin with disappointment. She reached for her phone to call a rideshare, then paused. Her instinct was to text Elias, but despite their recent reconciliation, something held her back. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the timing. They were scheduled to present their revised strategy to the board tomorrow morning, and the only copy of her latest data was on the laptop sitting at home. The stolen bike couldn't have come at a worse time. With a sigh, she began walking. 3 miles in the rain wasn't ideal, but she'd walked through worse before. She was 6 blocks in when a familiar electric car rolled to a stop beside her. The window lowered. "Need a ride?" Elias asked. Rain dripped from her hair as she turned, blinking through the downpour. "How did you?" "I didn't," he admitted. "I was heading to your office. Olivia said you'd already left. Then I saw someone walking alone in the rain and thought, no way, that's not you." She slid into the passenger seat, water pooling beneath her coat. "My bike was stolen." "That's why you were walking." His hands gripped the steering wheel. "Why didn't you call me?" "We've got the board presentation tomorrow. You've got enough on your plate." Elias shook his head, pulling away from the curb. "That's not how partnerships work, Sienna." They drove in silence, the comfortable kind. No tension, no pretense, just the sound of rain on the windshield and the city passing by. At her building, she turned to him. "The data we need, it's on my laptop upstairs. I'll run up and grab it." "I'll come with you," Elias said. "We can work on it together." She hesitated, just for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, it's not exactly what you're used to." Sienna's apartment was small, but full of life. Cheerful yellow walls, mismatched but cozy furniture, shelves filled with thriving plants, and hand-built bookshelves. It didn't speak of wealth, but of warmth, intention, and care. "Make yourself comfortable," she called from the bedroom. Elias wandered slowly, taking it all in. The framed photos of Sienna with her mother, a small corner desk cluttered with sketches for new filtration systems, sticky notes of formulas and reminders layered like petals. Lila emerged from another room and stopped mid-step at the sight of him. "You must be the famous boss," she said, arms crossed. "Elias Brennan," he said, offering a hand. "And you're Lila, the social worker?" Lila blinked. "She talks about me?" "She says you're the most dedicated advocate she knows." That seemed to soften Lila's stance. She nodded once. "Coffee's in the kitchen if you want it. I'm off to my night shift." When Sienna returned, dressed in dry clothes and holding her laptop, she found Elias standing by a photo of her and her mother in front of a modest little house. "My childhood home," she said, setting her laptop down on the kitchen table. "My mom worked double shifts to keep it." "You look happy," Elias said softly. "We were," Sienna replied, powering on the laptop. "Being poor doesn't mean being unhappy." They worked for hours at the kitchen table, building and refining the presentation that would determine the future of Sienna's program. Data-filled spreadsheets, charts grew more convincing, but somewhere between the numbers the conversation began to drift. "My father built his company on traditional energy," Elias said, leaning back. "Coal, oil. He saw solar and wind as childish fantasies. When I told him I wanted to focus on renewable tech, he said I was throwing away everything he'd built." Sienna looked up. "So why did you keep going?" Elias was silent for a moment, eyes fixed on a spot just beyond the table. "I once visited a community downstream from one of our old energy plants," he said quietly. "The water wasn't safe to drink. Kids had respiratory issues. That's when it hit me. Our family's wealth, it came at their expense." Sienna didn't speak. She let the weight of his words settle. "That must have caused tension," she finally said. "My father didn't speak to me for 8 months after I left the family company to start Solterra," Elias admitted. "He died still believing I was wrong." Sienna studied him. "That's why Bennett's betrayal cut so deep. He wasn't just a board member. He was the last thread connecting you to your father." Elias nodded. "But maybe that's how it needed to end. Maybe it's time to define this company by my values, not just as a reaction to his." The next morning, they presented their revised strategy to the board. Sienna spoke first, laying out how real-world community applications could spark scalable innovation. Elias followed with financial models that showed not just ethical impact, but long-term profitability. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The board approved full funding for Sienna's program and authorized integrating her model across multiple divisions. As the boardroom began to empty, Elias turned to her. "We make a good team." Sienna smiled. "We do. Different lenses, shared vision." In the weeks that followed, their partnership deepened, not just on paper, but in spirit. Elias began joining Sienna on more field visits, learning names, shaking hands, listening. not as an executive but as a guest in someone else's world. Sienna, in turn, found herself more at ease in corporate meetings, where her once unconventional ideas were now reshaping Solterra's future. They were growing together. One evening, after completing a successful installation at a local community center, Sienna glanced at her phone and sighed. "My rideshare app just crashed, and it's getting late." "I'll drive you," Elias offered, then paused. "But I want to show you something first." They drove into an industrial district undergoing revitalization. He pulled into a small lot outside a modest community workshop. Inside, he led her past shelves of donated tools and handmade benches to a quiet corner where something unexpected waited. Laid out neatly across a table were parts of a bicycle, each piece labeled, sorted. Sienna blinked. "What is this?" "I thought, instead of replacing your stolen bike with a new one, which you'd probably call excessive, we could build one. Together." Elias glanced at her nervously. "The frame's recycled. Most of the components are sustainably sourced. The owner here said we could use the space on weekends." Sienna stepped forward, running her fingers over the frame, speechless. "This isn't about convenience," Elias continued. "It's about process. About building something meaningful." Sienna looked up at him, and in that moment she saw more than just kindness. She saw understanding, true, intentional understanding. "It's perfect," she whispered. That night they began. Elias surprised her with his comfort around tools. Sienna brought technical precision. They moved naturally together, passing wrenches, aligning gears, measuring frame tension. Their hands brushed more than once, lingering just a little longer each time. By the third evening, the bicycle was nearly complete, a mosaic of purpose, memory, and collaboration. As they tightened the final bolts, Elias paused, hands resting on the handlebars. "Sienna," he said softly. She set her wrench down, her pulse quickening. "These last few months, working with you, it's changed how I see everything. Not just business, not just sustainability, life." He looked directly at her. "I think I'm falling in love with the way you see the world." Sienna's expression warmed, her eyes gentle. "And I think I'm falling in love with the way you're learning to see it differently." There, in that simple workshop, with grease on their fingers and hope in their hearts, a different kind of blueprint was being drawn. And this one wasn't just for a bike. It was for something far more lasting. He took the hand of Sienna Clark, community advocate, daughter of resilience. When their lips met for the first time in that quiet workshop, it wasn't about ignoring what made them different. It was about honoring it. Two people, raised in separate worlds, finding common ground in shared values. Learning that strength isn't always born from similarity, but from a willingness to listen, to grow, and to build together. The bicycle they assembled became more than transportation. It became a symbol, practical, purposeful. Constructed from parts that didn't seem to fit at first glance, but when carefully connected, formed something uniquely strong. 18 months later, golden morning light filtered through the windows of a modest but warm home, nestled in a neighborhood that walked the line between urban convenience and deep-rooted community. In the kitchen, Sienna sipped her coffee, flipping through project notes while the scent of basil from the garden drifted in through the open window. On the fridge, a calendar was filled with community site visits, global board meetings, and weekend cycling trips. Next to it, a photo, Sienna and Elias standing beside their mothers. Two women from different worlds, smiling with the quiet knowing of shared pride. Elias entered, already dressed for the day. He held his tablet, eyes scanning updates. The Singapore team just sent over their plans. They've adapted the filtration system for monsoon conditions. Sienna smiled. Perfect timing. The Jakarta leaders are meeting with us next week. Under their joint leadership, Solterra Innovations had transformed. Sienna now headed a fully funded global community implementation division. What had begun as a pilot program was now a cornerstone of the company. Elias had restructured the organization's strategy entirely, placing accessibility and equity on the same tier as technological excellence. Their personal lives had evolved too. They chose this home intentionally. Halfway between the downtown skyline Elias once called his world and the neighborhood where Sienna had built hers. Close enough for her to remain grounded in community with the quiet space Elias needed to breathe. On weekends, they biked together. Sometimes with her mother, sometimes with Lila, who still referred to Elias as the CEO with a shovel after his infamous gardening attempts. Their small backyard was now a vibrant green space. Herbs, tomatoes, and even sunflowers tended lovingly by Elias, who had discovered a hidden talent for coaxing things to grow. That morning, as they packed up to leave, Sienna's phone rang. "Emma Reynolds," she answered, switching on speaker. A warm, accented voice responded. "This is Dr. Amara Okafor from the International Sustainability Alliance." Sienna glanced at Elias as the name registered. "We're calling about your application. The committee was deeply impressed by your implementation model. We'd like to formally offer you the role of Regional Director for Southeast Asia." Sienna froze. Her heart beat faster. This was it. The dream job. The one she'd applied for months ago, before everything. Before she and Elias had found their rhythm. Before Solterra had evolved into something she no longer wanted to walk away from. "That's incredible news," she managed to say. Dr. Okafor continued. "The role would require relocation to Singapore for at least 2 years. We'd need someone on site to coordinate directly with governments and local partners." Across the kitchen, Elias stood still. His face was unreadable, but his eyes said everything. "Could I have a few days to consider?" Sienna asked. "Of course. Please let us know by Friday." The call ended. Silence fell between them, not heavy, but fragile. Sienna looked down at her phone, then up at Elias. She'd always believed in building things that last, but now she would have to ask herself, which things, and at what cost? Silence stretched between them in the kitchen, quiet but full of meaning. Sienna set down her phone, her mind a storm of questions. "You should take it," Elias said finally, his voice low but steady. "It's everything you've worked for." "But we've built something meaningful here," Sienna replied softly. "At Solterra. In our life together." "I would never ask you to give up your dream. And I would never ask you to give up yours," she said, meeting his eyes. "Solterra is your vision." That day, they drove to work separately. The weight of the decision sat between them like a quiet passenger. At Solterra, they wore their professionalism like a second skin, calm and composed. But those who knew them best could sense the shift. The ease between them had grown careful. That evening, Elias returned home to find Sienna surrounded by documents at the dining table. Maps, reports, highlighted excerpts, all spread out with the precision of someone searching not for answers, but for possibilities. "I've been looking into ISA's Southeast Asia initiatives," she explained. "They're focusing on coastal regions hit hardest by rising sea levels." Elias sat across from her, curiosity slowly replacing the ache in his chest. "They need your experience," he said. "They do," Sienna admitted, "but look at this." She pushed a few marked pages toward him. "These are the exact challenges we solved last year. Community trust, resource adaptation, system durability." Elias scanned the pages. His strategic instincts flared to life even as his heart braced itself. "Their government collaboration model is rigid," he observed, "and their community engagement plan is too standardized," Sienna added. "It doesn't respect cultural nuance." Elias looked up, searching her expression. "Sienna, what are you saying?" "I'm saying they need more than one voice," she said quietly. "What if Solterra didn't lose me to ISA? What if we partnered with them?" He stilled. "You mean expand Solterra internationally as an ISA collaborator?" Sienna nodded. "We have the tech, the strategy, they have the local access, the trust. Together we could scale faster and better." Elias leaned back, the idea taking shape in his mind. "It's bold, but it makes sense. We've already considered Asia for expansion. This gives us a trusted entry point." She hesitated, then asked, "But what about us? Would this feel like a compromise to you?" He reached across the table and took her hand gently. "I need to ask you the same thing, Sienna. Is this your dream, or are you reshaping it for us?" Sienna held his gaze. "My dream," she said, "has always been to make real impact. That hasn't changed. What's changing is the shape of the path. Together," she continued, "we could do more than either of us could alone." Over the next 2 days, they poured themselves into the idea, drafting a full proposal that outlined a partnership between Solterra Innovations and the International Sustainability Alliance. Elias presented it to Solterra's board. Sienna took it to Dr. Okafor. Both organizations saw the potential almost immediately. By Friday, an agreement was in place, historic in scope, grounded in purpose. Sienna would become joint director of the Southeast Asia Sustainability Initiative, representing both ISA and Solterra. Elias would retain his leadership role at Solterra, dividing his time between headquarters and Southeast Asia, with quarterly extended stays on the ground. They would launch pilot projects across 5 countries, integrating ISA's regional expertise with Solterra's hands-on implementation strategies. 3 weeks later, dawn brushed soft gold across the sky as they pedaled toward the airport together. Sienna rode their bicycle, the one they had built side by side. It now carried saddlebags filled with program documents, maps, and letters of commitment. Beside her, Elias kept pace, his own bike newly tuned and ready. Ahead of them lay boardrooms and villages, policy briefings and field tests, long days and longer nights. But most of all, what lay ahead was a future they'd built not by choosing between their dreams, but by choosing each other. Who would have thought? Sienna mused with a soft laugh as they paused at a quiet intersection just before sunrise, that showing up to an interview on a bicycle would lead to all this. Elias turned to her, the golden morning light catching the edge of her smile. "It wasn't the bicycle," he said, voice gentle with affection. "It was everything you said and everything you stood for after you got off it that left me speechless." She looked at him for a moment, her eyes shining not just with love, but with knowing of how far they'd come and how far they were about to go. They began moving again, pedaling side by side through the hushed city streets, not one leading, not one following. Just 2 people, equal, different, but aligned, riding together toward a horizon they were shaping with every conversation, every challenge, every moment of shared belief. The woman who once arrived at an interview with rain in her hair and conviction in her voice. And the man who once believed that success came from towering buildings and polished suits, had built something rare, something real, a relationship that didn't require shrinking to fit each other's world, but instead created space for both to grow, freely, fiercely, and fully into who they were meant to be. And as the sun rose behind them, they didn't look back, because everything worth building was still ahead.